two, but several, each one beginning the same way. This is the Zodiac speaking. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be known. He wanted control. Northern California, 1968. A quiet road on the edge of town. Two teenagers sit inside a parked car. The night is still. Empty, then gunfire. No witnesses, no suspects, just silence. 7 months pass. Another couple, another car, another burst of violence, but this time something changes. A phone rings inside a police station. A calm male voice says he wants to report a double murder. He gives details only the killer would know. He doesn't rush. He doesn't stutter. He sounds steady. The killer is no longer hiding in the dark. He is inserting himself into the investigation. September 1969. A man approaches a young couple near a lake. He is wearing a black hood on his chest, a white crosshair symbol. He binds them, he stabs them, then walks to their car and writes dates on the door, dates that match previous attacks. This isn't random. This is branding. Weeks later, San Francisco. A taxi pulls to a stop. The driver never makes it home. 3 teenagers watch from a nearby window. They see him clearly. A white male, stocky build, glasses, short hair. Police are dispatched. But somewhere in the radio transmission, the description changes. Officers begin searching for someone else. And in that gap, he walks. An officer may have even spoken to him, asked him if he had seen anything suspicious, and let him go. Think about that. A serial killer, standing on a sidewalk, under a streetlight, just minutes after committing murder, seen, described, and then gone. For decades, investigators chased letters. They studied handwriting. They analyzed fingerprints. They cracked ciphers. They debated suspects. Arthur Leigh Allen, Lawrence Kane, others whose names drifted in and out of suspicion. But no arrest, no conviction, no definitive answer. The case became legend, because this wasn't just murder, it was performance. The letters taunted police. The ciphers challenged the public. The symbol became infamous. He created fear, and then he watched it spread. But tonight, we're not just retelling the story. We're reopening the moment that may have changed everything. The night he was seen. The night the description was wrong. The night opportunity slipped through a radio speaker. Was he a calculated planner? An attention-seeking narcissist? Or a man who simply got lucky once and disappeared into history? If that dispatch call had been accurate, if one sentence had been different, would we know his name today? Would this case be closed? Or was he always going to vanish for the next 90 minutes? We examine the timeline, the phone calls, the letters, the suspects, and the mistake that may have cost investigators their only real chance. You are not just watching. You are part of this investigation, because sometimes history doesn't hinge on evidence. It hinges on seconds, on words, on small human errors, and on one man walking calmly into the night. Tonight, we reopen the file. December 20th, 1968. Lake Herman Road, a narrow, winding stretch of asphalt between Vallejo and Benicia, California. Rural, unlit, surrounded by open fields and scattered brush. At night, it becomes almost completely isolated. 17-year-old David Faraday and a 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen park their car in a turnout just off the road. It is close to 11 p.m., 4 days before Christmas. They are young, on a date, in a place many couples had gone before them. But sometime between 11:10 and 11:15 p.m., something changes. Another vehicle approaches. We don't know how long it had been watching. We don't know whether the driver had followed them. We don't know whether they were chosen or simply encountered. What we do know is this: shots are fired. David Faraday is found inside the car, fatally wounded. Betty Lou Jensen is discovered outside the vehicle, several feet away, having attempted to flee. No valuables appear stolen. No signs of prolonged struggle. No witnesses come forward immediately with a clear description. At the time, the crime is shocking, but not yet historic. There is no known Zodiac, just a double homicide on a dark road. And then, for 6 months, silence. That gap matters, because whoever committed this crime did not immediately seek attention. He waited. July 4th, 1969. Blue Rock Springs Park, Vallejo, California. Just after midnight, Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau sit inside a parked car. It's Independence Day. Fireworks have filled the sky earlier in the evening. A vehicle pulls into the parking lot. It parks briefly, leaves, then returns. This detail is critical. The driver doesn't act impulsively. He repositions, reassesses. He approaches the passenger side window, and without warning, he opens fire. Multiple shots. Michael survives despite serious injuries. Darlene Farron does not. But the defining moment of this crime happens 40 minutes later. At approximately 12:40 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department receives a call. The caller speaks calmly. He reports the shooting at Blue Rock Springs. Then he adds something else. He claims responsibility for the Lake Herman Road murders, the December attack. The voice is controlled, measured, detached. He gives directions to the crime scene. He hangs up. This is the moment the pattern forms, because now 2 attacks are connected by the killer himself. And this time, he wants credit. August 1st, 1969. Nearly 1 month later. 3 letters arrive at 3 different newspapers: the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each letter contains similar wording. Each claims responsibility for both attacks. Each includes specific details about the crimes that had not been released publicly, and each contains a section of a cipher. A coded message divided into 3 parts. The writer demands that the cipher be printed on the front page of each newspaper. If not, he threatens more violence. This is escalation. The killer is no longer just committing crimes. He is orchestrating publicity. He signs the letters with a symbol, a circle crossed by vertical and horizontal lines, a crosshair. Soon after, in a follow-up letter, he names himself the Zodiac. For the first time, the killer becomes a persona, not just a suspect, a brand. Investigators now face a new challenge. They are not simply hunting a murderer. They are hunting someone who understands media cycles, someone who manipulates headlines, someone who enjoys the power of anticipation. The cipher published in newspapers is partially solved by a schoolteacher and his wife. The decoded message is disturbing. It speaks about killing for pleasure, about collecting slaves for the afterlife. It does not reveal a name. It does not provide a location, but it confirms something chilling. The writer is deliberate. He has time. He is thinking ahead. September 27, 1969. Lake Berryessa. Unlike the previous attacks, this one occurs in broad daylight. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard are relaxing near the shoreline in the late afternoon. The setting is peaceful. Open sky, calm water. Then a man approaches. He is wearing an executioner-style hood, black fabric covering his head and face, clip-on sunglasses over the hood. On his chest, a white crosshair symbol. This is Theodore. He claims to be an escaped convict. He says he needs money and their car to escape to Mexico. But instead of leaving after binding them, he attacks. The control here is methodical, calculated. He takes his time. Afterward, he walks back to their vehicle. With a black marker, he writes on the car door, December 20th, 68 July 4th, 69 September 27th, 69. And beneath the dates, he draws the crosshair symbol. He signs his work. This is not a spontaneous act. This is documentation. Cecilia Shepard dies 2 days later. Brian Hartnell survives and provides detailed testimony. For the first time, investigators have a description of clothing, of voice patterns, of physical build, but still, no identity. October 11th, 1969. San Francisco. A shift in geography. A shift in boldness. Taxi driver Paul Stein picks up a fare near Union Square. The destination, Presidio Heights. At approximately 9:55 p.m., the taxi stops at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets. Moments later, Paul Stein is shot. The killer removes a piece of his shirt. Teenagers in a nearby house witness part of the scene and call police. A description is broadcast. But there is confusion in the initial report. Officers reportedly encounter a white male walking away from the area. Due to a miscommunication over the radio, the description they had received does not match him. They let him pass. The suspect disappears into the Presidio. And days later, another letter arrives at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside is a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Proof. The Zodiac confirms the murder. He mocks the police. He claims they nearly caught him. The escalation is complete. From rural roads to city neighborhoods, from anonymous shootings to direct taunting. As 1969 turns into 1970, the confirmed attacks stop. But the letters continue. The Zodiac sends more ciphers. Some remain unsolved for decades. He threatens school buses. He claims additional victims, far more than law enforcement can verify. The tone of the letters shifts, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes grandiose, sometimes strangely playful. He inserts himself into public fear. He dictates when he will resurface, then disappears again. This unpredictability becomes his weapon. Jurisdiction becomes a problem. Vallejo Police, Napa County Sheriff, San Francisco Police Department. Different evidence storage systems. Different investigative teams. No centralized digital database. No DNA profiling technology at the time. Fingerprints are lifted, but inconclusive. Handwriting analysis produces suspects, but no confirmation. Every clue must be physically compared. Every lead requires manpower. And as months pass without new confirmed murders, public urgency fluctuates. Interest spikes when a new letter appears, then fades again. The Zodiac seems to understand this rhythm. He resurfaces just as attention wanes, then retreats. April 20th, 1970. Another letter arrives. He references a bomb. He provides diagrams. Whether the bomb was real or bluff remains uncertain. But the psychological effect is undeniable. The fear expands beyond couples in parked cars. Now, schoolchildren, families, entire communities. He widens the emotional radius of his threat. Then, gradually, something changes. After 1971, confirmed communications decrease. By 1974, letters stop entirely. No arrest, no confession, no definitive forensic match, just an unresolved file. Over time, suspects emerge. Some based on circumstantial evidence. Some based on handwriting comparisons. Some based on geographic proximity, but none conclusively proven. The case becomes a cultural phenomenon. Books are written. Documentaries produced. The name Zodiac becomes synonymous with unsolved mystery. In 2020, the so-called 340 cipher, one of the more complex coded messages sent in 1969, is finally solved by a team of independent code breakers. The message does not reveal his name, but it reinforces what investigators suspected. The Zodiac was not improvising chaos. He was constructing identity. He was curating mythology. And here is where the timeline becomes even more important. Because when we step back and examine it as a whole, patterns emerge. The attacks escalate geographically. They escalate theatrically. They escalate psychologically. First, isolation. Second, connection through confession. Third, costume and signature. Fourth, urban boldness. Then, media manipulation. Then, silence. That final phase is the most unsettling, because the silence is not defeat. It is ambiguity. Did he stop killing? Did he move? Did he die? Or did he simply stop claiming responsibility? The timeline cannot answer that, but it reveals something else. Control. Every confirmed act was followed by calculated communication. Every communication reignited fear. Every gap created anticipation. The Zodiac did not just commit crimes. He managed attention. And that is what makes this timeline different from many others. It is not only a sequence of violence, it is a sequence of messaging, a rhythm of appearance and disappearance, a performance with acts and intermissions. And perhaps the most haunting detail is this. The case remains officially unsolved, decades later. Advancements in forensic science have revisited evidence. DNA attempts have been made. Suspects have been publicly named and dismissed. But no courtroom resolution exists. No definitive identity. The crosshair symbol remains detached from a confirmed face. So, what does the timeline truly tell us? It tells us the Zodiac evolved. It tells us he studied reactions. It tells us he understood that fear spreads faster than bullets. It tells us he preferred psychological dominance over sheer body count. And it tells us that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the act itself, but the story built around it. The clock began ticking on December 20th, 1968. It accelerated in July 1969. It reached a crescendo in October, then slowly faded into uncertainty. But the file never closed, because unresolved timelines never really end. They linger, waiting for the missing piece. And until that piece appears, the pattern remains open. The silence remains unanswered. And the question persists. Was the Zodiac a calculating strategist? or simply a man who understood how to turn chaos into legend? That is what the timeline forces us to confront. And this is only the beginning. the Zodiac introduced himself to the world, he did not begin with a name. He began with a puzzle. August 1st, 1969. 3 Bay Area newspapers receive letters. Each letter contains 1/3 of a cipher, a coded message made up of strange symbols, shapes, letters, and characters. The writer demands they be printed on the front page, or he will kill again. This is not random chaos. This is structured theater. Because a cipher does something powerful, it forces participation. It transforms passive readers into active problem solvers. It ensures attention lasts longer than a headline. And it makes the killer's identity feel hidden, but accessible, as if anyone could solve him. The 408 Cipher. The first puzzle. The first cipher becomes known as the 408 cipher, named for its length, 408 characters. It is eventually solved by a high school teacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty Hardin. They notice patterns, repeated symbols, common 3-letter combinations. They test frequency analysis, a classic cryptographic technique used to break substitution ciphers. In simple terms, they assume that certain symbols represent common letters in English. E, T, A, O. They begin replacing symbols. Gradually, a message emerges, and when it is fully decoded, it reveals something disturbing. The Zodiac writes, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." He continues, "It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." Then the message shifts toward something almost philosophical. He speaks about collecting slaves for the afterlife. He claims that those he kills will serve him in paradise. There is no confession of identity, no real-world detail, only ideology, and that matters, because it tells investigators something crucial. This is not a simple brag. This is worldview. He is constructing mythology. He is positioning himself above ordinary criminals. The cipher becomes less about hiding his name and more about revealing his psychology. The missing 18 characters. There is one section of the 408 cipher that remains unsolved. 18 characters at the end. They do not decode cleanly. They may be gibberish. They may be deliberate. Or they may hide something subtle. But even here, ambiguity becomes part of the mystique, because an unsolved fragment keeps curiosity alive. It prevents closure. It invites speculation, and speculation fuels legend. The 340 cipher, the long silence. Then comes the second major puzzle, November 8, 1969. Another letter arrives. Inside, a 340-character cipher, more complex, more chaotic in structure. Unlike the first cipher, this one resists solution. Decades pass. Professional cryptographers attempt to decode it. The FBI studies it. Amateur code breakers dissect it. Nothing definitive emerges. The symbols appear less uniform. The patterns are irregular. Some believe it is unsolvable. Some believe it is meaningless. But in 2020, more than 50 years later, a breakthrough occurs. A team of private code breakers cracks the cipher using advanced computational techniques. They identify a diagonal reading pattern, not strictly left to right, but shifting direction. When decoded, the message reads in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me." Pause. It continues, "That wasn't me on the TV show." He references a television appearance where someone falsely claimed to be him. He mocks the public's obsession. He mocks the investigation. And then, Once again, he denies fear of execution. He insists he will have slaves in the afterlife. The message is not a name. It is not a confession. It is reinforcement. Reinforcement of persona. Reinforcement of myth. But here's the crucial difference between the 408 and the 340. The first cipher was solvable relatively quickly. The second resisted for 51 years. That gap alone amplified his legend. Because an unsolved cipher suggests intelligence, it suggests superiority. It suggests hidden mastery. Whether that mastery was genuine or simply luck amplified by complexity remains debated. Was he truly skilled? Let's step back. What kind of cryptographer was the Zodiac? The 408 cipher used a simple homophonic substitution method, meaning one letter could be represented by multiple symbols. This makes frequency analysis harder, but not impossible. It is a known technique. It requires patience more than brilliance. The 340 cipher was more sophisticated in structure, but still not groundbreaking by professional standards. It did not require secret military knowledge. It required experimentation, persistence, creative arrangement. So the myth of the Zodiac as a master cryptographic genius may be exaggerated. What he understood, perhaps better than advanced encryption, was perception. He knew complexity equals mystique. He knew delay equals intrigue. He knew that if something cannot be solved quickly, people assume depth, and depth implies intelligence, whether deserved or not. The 13-symbol cipher. On April 20th, 1970, another letter arrives. Inside is a short cipher, only 13 symbols long. The Zodiac claims this cipher contains his name. 13 symbols. That's it. Cryptographers analyze it endlessly. But here's the problem. 13 characters is too short to reliably decode with certainty. There are too many possible combinations, too many permutations. Statistically, dozens, perhaps hundreds of names could fit. And that may have been intentional. He offers a puzzle that appears solvable, but isn't. He dangles identity, then pulls it back. This is psychological manipulation, not cryptographic necessity. The 32-symbol map code. In June 1970, the Zodiac sends a map of San Francisco with a crosshair symbol centered on Mount Diablo. Alongside it is a 32-symbol cipher. He claims it reveals the location of a bomb. Investigators attempt to decode it. Some believe it references radians and degrees. Others believe it is symbolic rather than literal. No bomb is ever found. Was there ever one? Or was the cipher itself the point? Because a bomb that exists in imagination spreads wider fear than one that detonates once. And again, the Zodiac demonstrates something chilling. He understands anticipation. He understands dread. He understands how to stretch fear across time. Language patterns and psychological indicators. Beyond the symbols, the language of the decoded ciphers matters. He frequently refers to slaves in the afterlife, killing as sport, control over fate. This suggests grandiosity, possible narcissistic traits, a desire to dominate beyond physical violence. But he also reveals insecurity. He reacts when not taken seriously. He becomes irritated when newspapers make errors. He demands recognition. This emotional fluctuation is telling. Because truly detached masterminds rarely seek validation. The Zodiac did. The ciphers were not just puzzles, they were mirrors. They reflect someone who wanted to be seen, but not identified. admired but not caught, feared but not confronted. Randomness versus design one debate continues among analysts. Were the ciphers carefully constructed masterpieces, or were they chaotic structures that accidentally resisted solution? The 340 ciphers diagonal pattern suggests design, but it also contains spelling errors, irregular grammar, odd phrasing. This suggests someone intelligent enough to manipulate symbols, but not formally trained in elite cryptography, which aligns with another possibility. He may have studied basic cryptographic methods from publicly available books. The late 1960s saw popular magazines discussing codes and ciphers. Puzzle books were widely sold. Encryption was not an obscure hobby. It was accessible. Zodiac did not need to be a genius. He needed curiosity, patience, and ego. The unsolved fragments. Even today, some portions of Zodiac communications remain disputed. Certain letters are believed authentic. Others are debated. Some ciphers remain partially interpreted. This incomplete picture perpetuates the mystery, because incomplete puzzles are more powerful than finished ones. Completion ends engagement. Ambiguity extends it. And, in that sense, the Zodiac's greatest cipher was not written on paper. It was his identity itself. The ultimate question. What were the ciphers really for? To conceal identity, or to construct persona? If his goal were anonymity alone, he could have remained silent. If his goal were maximum casualties, he could have focused on violence. Instead, he invested time in messaging, time in encoding, time in theatrical presentation. That suggests something deeper. He wanted to be remembered, and he understood something most criminals do not. Fear fades, but puzzles endure. A solved crime closes a chapter. An unsolved cipher keeps the book open. And so, more than half a century later, people are still decoding him, still analyzing patterns, still searching for meaning in symbols. The crosshair, the scrambled alphabets, the taunting phrases, each one a fragment of a constructed identity. Final reflection. The Zodiac's ciphers did not give us his name. They did not provide his address. They did not confess in a conventional sense. What they gave us instead was access to performance, to ego, to myth-making. They turned a regional criminal investigation into a cultural enigma, and that transformation may have been his greatest success, because even in silence, the puzzles continue speaking. The symbols remain frozen in time, waiting, challenging, inviting, and until a definitive identity is confirmed. The greatest cipher of all remains unsolved. Not the 408, not the 340, but the man behind them. most serial investigations, there is no face, no witness who stood close enough, no moment where eye contact was made, no description that lingers with precision. But in this case, there was. More than once. The Zodiac was not an invisible phantom. He was seen. He was described. He was almost stopped. And that is what makes this section of the case so unsettling. Because the man they saw was real. Lake Berryessa. Daylight encounter, September 27, 1969. Lake Berryessa. Unlike the previous attacks, this one did not unfold under cover of darkness. It was late afternoon, clear skies, open shoreline, calm water. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were sitting near the lake when they noticed a man approaching from a distance. He was not running, not hiding. He was walking deliberately, wearing dark clothing. And then they saw the hood. An executioner-style black hood covering his head. Clip-on sunglasses over the fabric. On his chest, a white crosshair symbol. This was not improvised. This was costume. The hood concealed his face completely, but it did not conceal everything. Hartnell later described his voice. Calm, measured, educated, not rushed. He spoke clearly. He gave instructions with confidence. He claimed to be an escaped convict from Montana. He said he needed their car and money. But something about the story did not quite align. The tone lacked desperation. It lacked urgency. It sounded rehearsed. After binding them, the attacker remained composed, controlled. There was no frantic energy, no panic. That composure is critical, because it suggests familiarity with stress, comfort in confrontation, an ability to regulate emotion under pressure, and that trait would surface again. Presidio Heights, the clearest sight. October 11th, 1969, San Francisco. This is where the face becomes clearer. Taxi driver Paul Stein picks up a passenger near Union Square. The ride appears routine. But at approximately 9:55 p.m., the taxi stops in Presidio Heights. Moments later, Stein is shot. And this time, there are witnesses. 3 teenagers inside a nearby home look out their window. They see a man in the front seat of the taxi. They observe him wiping down surfaces, methodical, unhurried. They see him step out of the vehicle. He appears white, adult male, stocky build, crew cut, glasses. He walks away from the scene calmly, not running, not sprinting, walking. That detail has always stood out. Because panic runs. Our control walks. Police are called immediately. A description is broadcast over the radio. White male, adult. Approximately 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. Heavyset. Short hair. Glasses. Dark clothing. But somewhere in the communication chain, an error occurs. The initial broadcast mistakenly identifies the suspect as a different race. Officers responding in the area are looking for someone who does not match the man walking away. And then comes one of the most haunting moments in the entire case. 2 patrol officers reportedly encounter a white male walking along Jackson Street. He matches the corrected description. But the officers had received the incorrect one. They speak briefly with the man. They do not detain him. They allow him to continue walking. He disappears into the Presidio. If this account is accurate, the Zodiac was stopped, questioned, and released. Not because he was clever in that moment, but because communication failed. That possibility lingers, because it transforms the mystery into something tangible. He was not myth that night. He was flesh and bone under a street lamp. The composite sketch days. After the Presidio Heights murder, a composite sketch is created, based on witness descriptions. The image is circulated publicly. A white male, round face, glasses, short hair, neutral expression. The sketch becomes iconic, but it also becomes problematic, because composite sketches capture perception, not photography. They reflect memory, and memory under stress is imperfect. Still, the sketch remains one of the strongest visual anchors in the investigation, and it suggests something important. The Zodiac did not hide in every encounter. He took risks: urban environment, residential neighborhood, witnesses nearby, streetlights. He was seen clearly enough for details. That suggests either confidence or compulsion. The behavior that stands out. Witnesses consistently describe calmness. No frantic movements, no wild gestures. He appeared controlled, deliberate, even after committing a violent act. This behavioral consistency matters more than facial features, because appearance can change. Weight fluctuates. Hair grows or recedes. Glasses can be removed. But behavioral patterns are harder to mask. Walking calmly away from a crime scene suggests a man who understood timing. Understood that chaos would not erupt instantly. Understood that blending in requires normal movement. That level of composure hints at planning, perhaps rehearsal, perhaps prior experience with law enforcement procedures. Voice patterns. Brian Hartnell's account at Lake Berryessa includes details about speech. The attacker did not sound uneducated. He did not stumble over words. He spoke in full sentences. He used structured explanations. His tone was not erratic. This challenges the stereotype of an impulsive drifter. Instead, it suggests someone functional, possibly employed, possibly socially integrated, someone who could present normally in everyday settings. Which raises an uncomfortable question. How many people may have interacted with him casually, never knowing? Physical description. Variations. Across sightings, certain consistencies appear. White male, stocky build, average height, short hair, glasses. But there are slight differences in estimated age. Some witnesses suggest late 20s, others early 40s. Stress affects perception. Lighting affects perception. Distance affects perception. And over time, investigators must decide which details carry weight. Was he heavier than average, or simply wearing layered clothing? Were the glasses prescription, or part of disguise? The uncertainty widens the suspect pool, and yet the core image remains consistent. The police encounter revisited. The alleged encounter between officers and the suspect remains debated, but if accurate, it reveals something profound. The Zodiac did not behave suspiciously enough to trigger alarm. He did not flee. He did not appear breathless. He did not look panicked. He walked, and that calmness may have been his greatest camouflage, because fear draws attention. Stillness deflects it. Could he have been recognized? After the composite sketch was released, tips flooded in. People believed they recognized the face. Co-workers, neighbors, acquaintances. The sketch resembled many ordinary men, and that may have been the point. He did not look monstrous. He did not look extraordinary. He looked ordinary, and ordinariness hides well in cities. The man behind the glasses. Eyewitnesses emphasize glasses, thick frames, common in the late 1960s. But glasses can be removed, contacts can be worn, weight can be altered, hair can be cut differently. If the Zodiac anticipated the release of a sketch, altering minor features would not be difficult, which means the face witnesses saw may have existed only briefly, a snapshot in time, before adaptation. The psychological edge. There is another layer to consider. Being seen and not caught reinforces ego. If the Zodiac was indeed questioned and released, that moment may have deepened his confidence. He was close enough to hear police radio chatter, close enough to see patrol cars, close enough to feel risk, and he escaped. That near miss transforms into fuel for letters, fuel for taunting, fuel for continued myth-building. The risk factor. Urban crime increases variables, more witnesses, more patrol units, more unpredictability. Yet he chose Presidio Heights. This was not a secluded lover's lane. This was a residential neighborhood. That decision marks peak boldness. It suggests a man testing limits, seeing how far he could push, and when he walked away unnoticed, the lesson may have been clear. He could operate in plain sight. The face that never became a name. Despite sketches, despite descriptions, despite possible encounters, no arrest followed, no definitive identification. The man they saw remains unconfirmed. Over the decades, various suspects were compared to the composite. Some bore resemblance, some did not. But resemblance is not proof, and memory fades. Witnesses age. Recollections blur. The moment under the street lamp becomes distant. Modern re-examinations. In later years, investigators revisited witness accounts, reevaluated timing, reconstructed patrol routes, examined the original radio logs. Each detail scrutinized again. But without definitive forensic evidence tying a face to the crimes, the visual memory remains just that. Memory. Powerful, compelling, but not conclusive. The lingering question. What makes this section so haunting is not what we don't know. It's what we almost knew. He was seen clearly enough for a sketch. He was encountered by police. He was described in detail. And yet, the gap between sight and certainty remains unbridged. That thin space between recognition and proof, between suspicion and arrest, between face and name. That space is where the mystery survives. Final reflection. The Zodiac was not invisible. He was not a shadow without form. He had weight, height, a voice, a gait, a face reflected in a taxi window. And for a few critical minutes in October 1969, he stood under city lights, ordinary enough to pass, calm enough to continue walking, close enough to be stopped, and distant enough to vanish. The man they saw may have been the closest law enforcement ever came. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of this case is not that he was never identified, but that he may have once been standing right there, in front of them, unrecognized. fog in Northern California doesn't just roll in, it consumes. In 1969, the summer of love was curdling into something darker. The hippie dream was fraying at the edges, and in the shadows of the Bay Area, a new kind of monster was emerging, one that didn't just kill but demanded an audience. Why are we still here, 50 years later, staring at grainy police sketches and cracked ciphers? It's because the Zodiac Killer didn't just commit murders, he created a brand. He was a pioneer of the media-saturated killer, a man who understood that a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle was more powerful than a knife or a 9mm Luger. He turned the public into his unwilling accomplices, forcing them to solve puzzles while he calculated his next move. The why is simple. We hate a story without an ending. We are haunted by the silhouette at Lake Berryessa, the hooded executioner standing in the bright daylight. We are haunted by the phone calls from public booths where a heavy breather claimed credit for the blood on the asphalt. Today, we step into that fog. We look at the men who lived double lives, the school teacher, the projectionist, the veteran, and the journalist. We look at the suspects who almost fit the hood. 1. Arthur Leigh Allen, the favorite child of suspicion. Imagine a man who is perpetually out of place. Arthur Leigh Allen was a former Navy man and a discharged schoolteacher living in a basement in Vallejo, surrounded by jars of organic specimens and a collection of firearms. His neighbors saw a strange duck, a man who liked skin diving and spoke with a flat, unsettling affect. The night of the crime. On the nights of the Vallejo murders, Allen's timeline becomes a series of convenient gaps. He told investigators he was going crabbing or heading to the coast, but his friends told a different story. They spoke of a man who referred to himself as Zodiac before the letters ever arrived. He wore a Zodiac brand watch. He owned a Royal typewriter, the same model used for the chilling confession letter in Riverside. But here's the friction. When the detectives finally cornered him, the science pushed back. His DNA didn't match the stamps. His handwriting didn't match the taunts. Was he the most unlucky innocent man in history, or a criminal genius who knew exactly how to foil the forensics of the 1970s? 2. Rick Marshall, the cinematic phantom. Rick Marshall didn't inhabit the world of schoolyards or Navy ships. He inhabited the world of celluloid. A projectionist at the Avenue Theater in San Francisco, Marshall lived in a basement apartment that felt like a movie set. He was a man of the arts, an intellectual who loved silent films and the grandiosity of old-world theater. The night of the crime, the Zodiac's letters weren't just threats, they were scripts. He referenced the Mikado and the most dangerous game. Marshall had access to the very films the Zodiac seemed to obsess over. Investigators noted that Marshall's handwriting bore a striking resemblance to the Zodiac's exorcist letter. If the Zodiac was a man playing a character, a villain in his own slasher flick, Marshall had the costume, the setting, and the motive. He was a man who lived in the dark, watching stories play out on a screen, perhaps deciding it was time to write his own. 3. Lawrence Kane, the predator in the shadows. Lawrence Kane was a man whose normal ended with a car accident in 1962. A traumatic brain injury allegedly stripped away his impulse control. He moved through the world with a simmering, quiet intensity. He worked in hotels and real estate, a man who knew how to navigate the service entrances and back alleys of the Bay Area. The night of the crime. Kane is the suspect of the witnesses. Kathleen Johns, who escaped a kidnapping on Highway 132, identified Kane's photo as the man who took her. Officer Don Fook, who may have seen the Zodiac fleeing the scene of Paul Stine's murder, noted Kane's physical similarity. Kane's night of the crime wasn't about theatrical letters, it was about the hunt. He was a predator who knew his territory, from the casinos of State Line to the Presidio of San Francisco. 4. Richard Gaikowski, the man behind the headlines. Richard Gaikowski lived for the scoop. As a member of the counterculture press at the Good Times newspaper, he was embedded in the radical politics of the era. He was anti-establishment, brilliant, and arguably a bit of a provocateur. The night of the crime. The theory here is meta. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a journalist's creation. Gaiki knew how the media worked. He knew how to trigger a headline. Suspicion intensified when a police dispatcher claimed Gaikowski's voice was a dead ringer for the man who called in the Blue Rock Springs shooting. If the Zodiac wanted to ensure his letters were published, who better than someone who already knew the editor's desk? The Zodiac's methodology was a mosaic of his suspects' backgrounds. Look at the ciphers, the Z340 and the Z408. They aren't just random symbols. The Navy influence, the use of nautical symbols and Cartesian coordinates, points toward someone like Allen, trained in communication and mapping. The journalistic influence, the taunting tone, the demands for front-page real estate, and the editorial corrections in the letters suggest someone like Gaikowski, who understood the power of the press. The projectionist's eye, the visual layout of the letters, the use of symbols that resemble film roll markers, and the theatricality suggest Rick Marshall's cinematic eye. The Zodiac was a composite personality. He used a 9mm like a soldier, wrote like a disgruntled intellectual, and staged his crimes like a director. His methodology was designed to be unsolvable because it lacked a singular, consistent motive, other than the pursuit of terror. We have spent decades trying to fit these men into a hood that might not belong to any of them. There is a chilling possibility that we must accept. The Zodiac may never have been on a list. He could have been the quiet neighbor who never raised his voice, the commuter who moved to another state in 1974, or the man who died of natural causes before DNA testing even existed. The unknown is the most terrifying suspect of all because he represents the failure of the system. The Zodiac didn't just escape. He vanished into the fabric of American folklore. As the years pass, the faces of Allen, Marshall, Kane, and Gaikowski fade, leaving only the crosshairs symbol, a haunting reminder that some monsters are never caught. They simply stop. Every unresolved case lives in a fragile space between what is known and what is provable. Investigators do not solve cases with suspicion. They solve them with convergence. A single clue rarely breaks a case. But when multiple forms of evidence begin pointing in the same direction, that is when silence collapses. Tonight, we are not revisiting theories. We are examining what could end them. What evidence, physical, digital, behavioral, or forensic, has the power to finally lock this puzzle into place? Because somewhere inside the mountain of data, interviews, lab reports, and archived material, there may already be a key, waiting to be recognized. DNA, the silent witness. DNA does not forget. It does not speculate. It does not care about rumor or reputation. It matches, or it excludes. That modern forensic science has transformed cold cases through advancements in genetic sequencing. Techniques that did not exist a decade ago are now capable of extracting viable profiles from samples once considered unusable. Even degraded material can sometimes be rebuilt, and that possibility changes everything. If viable DNA exists in this case, even partial, emerging technologies could refine previously incomplete samples, reanalyze stored evidence with higher sensitivity, identify distant familial matches, link unknown profiles to national or international databases. The most powerful shift in modern investigations has been investigative genetic genealogy. A distant cousin match, a shared great-grandparent, a fragment of ancestry that narrows millions to dozens. But DNA is not magic. It requires integrity of sample, a proper preservation, careful interpretation. Contamination risks must be ruled out. Chain of custody must remain intact. Still, if there's biological material preserved, however small, science continues to evolve. And time, once an enemy, can become an ally. 2. Touch DNA and trace evidence. Not all DNA comes from blood or obvious sources. Touch DNA, microscopic skin cells left behind through contact, has become increasingly valuable. Door handles, fabric, personal items, environmental surfaces. What once required visible material can now be identified from invisible transfer. Additionally, trace evidence such as fibers, soil composition, pollen, hair fragments can connect a suspect to location with surprising specificity. Soil analysis, for example, can reveal unique mineral signatures tied to specific geographic zones. Pollen can indicate seasonal or environmental exposure. Fibers can connect clothing to scene. Each fragment is small, but when aligned together, fragments form structure. The power of trace evidence lies in accumulation. One fiber means little. 20 fibers mean something. 3. Digital forensics. The invisible timeline. Phones rarely lie, even when deleted, even when factory reset. Digital forensics can reconstruct location history, Wi-Fi connections, Bluetooth proximity, app usage logs. Metadata from images and video devices create timestamps even when users attempt concealment. Cell tower pings triangulate approximate location. Vehicle infotainment systems log movement. Smartwatches track steps and heart rate spikes. The question is not whether digital evidence exists. It is whether it has been fully exhausted. With advancing extraction tools, previously inaccessible data can sometimes be recovered. A single location confirmation. A device near the scene at a critical time. A search query that suggests premeditation. Digital convergence can be devastatingly precise, But digital evidence also requires careful context. Presence alone does not equal guilt. Absence alone does not equal innocence. Correlation must meet intent. 4. Audio and video enhancement. Technology has advanced dramatically in voice and image enhancement. Low-quality footage can now be clarified. Background noise can be isolated. Vocal characteristics can be profiled. Enhancement tools can stabilize blurred imagery, increase contrast clarity, extract voice print markers, separate overlapping sound frequencies. Voice analysis does not identify identity with certainty, but it can narrow range, age estimation, regional dialect patterns, speech rhythm, breathing cadence, even stress indicators. Every syllable carries data. When paired with other evidence, that data becomes weight. V. Behavioral forensics behavior leaves residue, not just physical, psychological, crime scene staging, interaction style, control dynamics. Investigators examine level of organization, evidence of planning, risk tolerance, emotional detachment. A behavioral profile does not name a suspect, but it can eliminate mismatches. If a suspect's known behavioral history contradicts scene psychology, that inconsistency matters. Conversely, if patterns align across multiple dimensions, that alignment strengthens probability. Behavior alone cannot convict, but behavior combined with physical and digital evidence can. 6. Vehicle forensics. Vehicles are mobile data archives, tire wear patterns, engine heat signatures, GPS navigation logs, aftermarket tracking devices. Security cameras from surrounding areas may have captured movement patterns not initially recognized. With modern AI-assisted image analysis, archived footage can be rescanned for unique vehicle features, light damage markers, window tint variations, custom accessories. What was missed once may not be missed twice. 7. Witness re-interviews. Memory evolves. Witnesses often recall additional details over time, especially when prompted with contextual cues. Cognitive interview techniques can unlock peripheral details, environmental sensations, background observations, subtle behavioral impressions. Re-interviewing is not redundancy, it is refinement, because trauma can suppress details initially, and time can reveal clarity. 8. New technology. Artificial intelligence analysis. AI-assisted pattern recognition has begun transforming investigative review. Algorithms can cross-reference massive datasets, detect previously unseen correlations, identify geographic clustering, compare behavioral signatures across cases. Cold cases benefit enormously from machine-driven reanalysis. Data that once required months of manual comparison can now be processed in hours. But AI does not replace investigators, it amplifies them. 9. The power of convergence. No single piece of evidence breaks a complex case, but convergence does. DNA aligning with digital presence aligning with timeline aligning with behavioral profile, behavior aligning with witness description. When independent evidence streams intersect, that intersection becomes powerful. That intersection becomes prosecutable. X. What would truly break it? The evidence that could definitively break this case would likely include confirmed forensic match, corroborated digital presence, timeline validation, behavioral consistency, absence of exclusion, 5 pillars, all aligned. Remove 1, doubt grows. Align all 5, certainty forms. 11. Why it hasn't happened. Yet cases remain open not because evidence is absent, but because convergence is incomplete. Investigations require more than suspicion. They require proof beyond reasonable doubt, and sometimes that proof is already collected, waiting for technological advancement, waiting for a database update, waiting for someone to speak, because evidence does not always emerge from labs. Sometimes it emerges from people, a confession, a tip, a loose thread finally pulled. 12th, the possibility that changes everything. There's always one piece of evidence investigators quietly hope for: a match, a definitive forensic alignment. When that happens, years of ambiguity collapse instantly. Speculation ends. Debate dissolves. And silence gives way to resolution. That the evidence that could break this case may already exist, stored, archived, preserved, waiting for the right tool, the right technology, the right connection. Because science evolves, databases expand, memory resurfaces, and time, once an obstacle, becomes opportunity. The case remains open not because it cannot be solved, but because convergence has not yet revealed itself publicly. When it does, it will not arrive as rumor. It will arrive as alignment, clear, precise, unavoidable. And when that day comes, the silence that has endured for so long will finally break. case remains unsolved, the crime does not end. It lingers, not in headlines, not in evidence rooms, but in people. Unresolved violence creates a different kind of aftermath. Not just grief, not just fear, but a suspension. A psychological pause that never fully releases. Tonight, we are not asking who did it. We are asking what it did to everyone else, and why, even now, we still search. 1. The families, living in the in-between. For families, an unsolved case is not history. It is present tense. Every birthday becomes a reminder. Every holiday carries absence. Every news alert sparks possibility. Hope and dread live side by side. There is no courtroom conclusion, no definitive sentencing, no final chapter. Just a question mark that refuses to close. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss. It is grief without resolution. Without certainty, the mind cannot settle. It loops, replays, imagines alternate endings, reconstructs moments. What if only, maybe. Closure is not just emotional comfort, it is neurological release. Without it, the stress response remains partially active. And so, families carry not just memory, but unfinished narrative. 2. The community. Trust. Fractured communities change after violence. Even when the streets look the same, a place once associated with comfort becomes marked. People remember where they were, what they felt, how suddenly normal life shifted. Safety is not just physical, it is psychological. When a case goes unsolved, that sense of safety does not fully return. Questions linger in quiet spaces. Was it random? Is the person still nearby? Could it happen again? Trust fractures subtly. Parents become more cautious, neighbors more observant. Silence becomes heavier, and over time, the case becomes part of local identity. Not because people want it to, but because it was never resolved. 3. Investigators. The weight of unfinished work for investigators. An unsolved case does not disappear when the shift ends. It follows. It sits on shelves, in digital files, in memory. Detectives speak of certain cases as unfinished sentences. A thread left hanging. Law enforcement culture values resolution, evidence gathered, arrests made, truth presented. But when the evidence does not converge, when the final piece remains missing, the case becomes something else, a quiet burden. Cold case units exist because of this burden, because investigators believe time can reveal what urgency could not. They revisit, re-examine, reconstruct, because sometimes the key was always there, just not visible yet. 4. The psychology of the unknown offender. An unidentified offender creates a different psychological phenomenon. Projection. Without a face, the mind fills one in. Fear becomes abstract, and abstract fear spreads more easily than defined threat. A known criminal is contained, named, located, but an unknown offender exists everywhere and nowhere at once. This amplifies anxiety. It expands possibility. It leaves the narrative unfinished, and unfinished narratives demand completion. That is part of why we still search. V. The media and the collective memory. Media coverage preserves cases in collective consciousness. Anniversaries reignite attention. Documentaries re-examine evidence. Podcasts revisit timelines. This sustained visibility has two effects. It keeps pressure alive, and it keeps wounds open. Public attention can generate new tips, new awareness, new technological interest, but it can also create distortion, speculation, simplification. The challenge is balance, to seek truth without amplifying rumor, to honor victims without sensationalizing tragedy. Because the story is not entertainment, it is reality, and reality deserves precision. 6. Why we still search, why continue after years, why reanalyze, why reopen files. Because justice delayed is not justice denied. Because science evolves. Because databases expand. Because someone who was silent may one day speak. Because one new connection can reframe everything. Human beings are wired for resolution. We crave completed stories. We struggle with unanswered questions. Searching is not obsession. It is instinct. It is the refusal to let uncertainty define the ending. 7. The cost of not knowing. Unresolved cases leave invisible costs. Emotional strain, community tension, lingering suspicion. Without answers, rumors fill space, and rumors can harm innocent lives. Closure does more than punish wrongdoing. It restores narrative order. It allows grief to settle. It allows communities to exhale. It replaces speculation with fact, and fact is stabilizing. 8. The power of possibility. Cold cases are solved every year, sometimes decades later, through DNA advancements, through chance discoveries, through a forgotten detail re-examined. The passage of time can erode memory, but it can also reveal patterns. New investigators bring fresh perspective. New technology brings sharper tools. New eyes see what others missed. And sometimes, the answer was always close, just obscured by noise. 9. The human need for truth. At its core, the search is not about punishment. It is about truth. Truth restores dignity to victims. Truth validates families. Truth anchors history. Without truth, stories drift. With truth, stories solidify. That is why we still search, not for spectacle, but for stability. X. If resolution comes. If resolution arrives, it will not feel dramatic. It will feel precise. A match confirmed. A timeline aligned. Evidence converging without contradiction. The noise will quiet. The speculation will end, and what remains will be fact. That moment, when it comes, will not erase the past, but it will redefine it, because uncertainty will no longer lead the narrative. Truth will. 11. If it doesn't, and if resolution never comes, the search still matters, because effort communicates value, because remembrance resists forgetting, because honoring victims does not require an arrest. It requires commitment. Some cases remain unsolved not because they are impossible, but because the final variable has not yet aligned. Time continues moving, and so does inquiry. 12. The final thought. Unresolved cases linger not in evidence rooms, but in hearts, in communities, in quiet questions asked late at night. We search because uncertainty unsettles us, because justice matters, because truth stabilizes, because someone deserves an answer. And until that answer arrives, the search continues. Not loudly, not recklessly, but persistently, patiently. Because somewhere within archived files, preserved evidence, digital trails, or human memory, the missing piece still exists. And one day, when convergence finally forms, silence will give way to certainty. Until then, we remember, we question, and we continue to search. The story remains unfinished, but unfinished does not mean forgotten. And as long as questions remain, so does the pursuit of truth.